I want you to hear this story, because I almost took it to my grave. My name is Harold Bennett, and on the morning of my 71st birthday, I found out that my 3 children had been lying to me for years. Not little lies. Not the kind you forgive over Sunday dinner. The kind that changes everything you thought you knew about the people you gave your whole life to raise. And once I found out, I made decisions that none of them saw coming. Let me tell you what happened. He lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, in the same house I bought with my wife Carol in 1988. 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, to a backyard with a magnolia tree we planted the year our youngest was born. Carol and I raised 3 children in that house. We coached their sports teams, sat in the front row at every school play, drove them to college, move-in days with the minivan packed so full we could barely see out the rear window. We were proud parents. I was a proud husband. And then, 9 years ago, Carol had a stroke on a Tuesday morning while she was making coffee in our kitchen. She died before the ambulance arrived. She was 61 years old. That was the worst day of my life. Nothing before or since has come close. I spent the first year after Carol died barely functioning. I retired early from my job as a civil engineer. I couldn't focus on blueprints. Couldn't think straight. My 3 children came around. In those first weeks, my oldest, my son Daniel at 44 now, a financial consultant in Raleigh. My middle child, my daughter Pamela, 4 to 12, married to a contractor, living 30 minutes away in Concord. My youngest, my son Greg, 39, who works in hotel management down in Charleston, South Carolina. They showed up. They helped me with the paperwork, the funeral arrangements, clearing out their mother's clothes. I was grateful. I thought we had each other. The years that followed, I tried to stay active in their lives, not in a suffocating way. I told myself, I showed up to my grandchildren's birthday parties, drove up to Raleigh for Daniel's kids' soccer games. I called every Sunday, kept it to 30 minutes so I wouldn't be a burden. I started cooking seriously after Carol died. The way she used to cook, proper meals with real ingredients, not just reheating frozen dinners. I took a class at the community college. I got decent at it. Good enough that holidays at my house became something I genuinely looked forward to. Christmas was my thing. Carol had always been the Christmas person in our family. The one who hung the same ornaments every year. Who made the same rum cake from a recipe her mother had passed down. After she was gone, I took that over. I bought the same ingredients. Learned the rum cake recipe from Carol's recipe box. Kept the traditions alive as best I could. My grandchildren, 5 of them ranging from 7 to 16. They called it Grandpa's Christmas. I held on to that. This past year, I started planning Christmas in early November. I know that sounds like a lot of lead time, but I am thorough by nature. Engineer's brain. I made lists. I ordered a 14-pound prime rib roast from a butcher in the South End, which was $68 on its own. I budgeted $320 total for the meal, which is substantial when your income is a retired pension and Social Security check that comes to about $2,600 a month, nearly 1/8 of what I bring in. For one dinner, but I never thought twice about it. Family is worth it. That is what I believed. The first week of December, I sent a group text to Daniel, Pamela, and Greg confirming Christmas at my place. Same as every year. Daniel replied quickly. Said they'd be there. Him and his wife Susan and their 3 kids. Pamela said yes. Her and her husband Kevin and their 2 girls. Greg said he'd drive up from Charleston. Probably arrive Christmas Eve. Perfect. 15 people. I made the seating chart. Pulled out Carol's china from the cabinet where it lives. The other 364 days of the year. Started thinking about the centerpiece. 2 weeks before Christmas, I was at my desk paying bills when my laptop made a notification sound. I had set up a shared email thread years ago for the extended family, a way to coordinate schedules and share photos of the grandkids. I almost didn't open the new message, but I did, and what I saw was not meant for me. Pamela had been composing an email to Daniel and Greg. She had intended to reply to their private conversation, but had hit reply all by mistake, which pulled me into the thread. The original chain, which I could now see in its entirety, had started 3 weeks earlier. I sat very still and read every word. Daniel, October 28th. Okay, so I need to talk to you guys about Christmas. Lisa and I were thinking about taking the kids to her parents' place in Vermont this year. Real snow. Skirental. The whole thing. The kids are at the perfect ages for it. Are we really doing Dad's thing again, Greg? October 29th. Honestly, I was hoping someone would bring this up. Charleston is 4 hours each way, and my schedule is brutal right now. The last few years, it's the same thing. Same stories. Same ornaments. Same rum cake. It's like a museum. I love Dad, but it's exhausting. Pamela. October 31st. I feel bad saying this, but yes. Kevin's been a really good sport about it, but his family keeps asking why we never go to them for the holidays. And Dad calls me every other day with questions about what I'm bringing or what time we're arriving. I had 3 voicemails from him last week about the centerpiece flowers. It's a lot. You guys. Daniel. He means well, but he has way too much time on his hands. We're his whole social life, and that's not healthy. Not for him, and not for us. Greg. Is it terrible if we just skip this year? All have something come up, Pamela? I hate coordinated excuses, but I also hate the guilt trip when we cancel. You know how he gets? He'll be quiet on the phone for like 30 seconds and then say no. No. I understand in that voice. You know that voice? Daniel. The voice? Yes. God. Greg. Okay, what if we each have a different excuse? Mine's easy. I'll say the hotel has mandatory all-hands Christmas weekend because there's a conference. He won't be able to verify that. Daniel. Lisa's parents in Vermont is legitimate. Or close enough. Pamela. Kevin has that weird thing with his knee. I can say he can't travel. Daniel. Done then. We skip, and then do a makeup brunch somewhere in January. Greg. Works for me. He'll be upset, but he'll get over it. Pamela. November 9th. The most recent message. The one she sent to all of us, by mistake. Guys, I just want to make sure we're still on the same page about Christmas. Dad brought it up again yesterday, and he seemed so excited. I started to feel guilty. But then I remembered last year when he corrected how I was carving the turkey in front of Kevin and my girls. And I thought, no, I need this break. He's too intense about it. It's like the holiday exists to reassure him that we're still a family. That's not fair to put on us. Then she added the line that I think about every single day since I love Dad. But he needs to understand we have our own lives now. He's turned Christmas into a coping mechanism, and that's his issue to work through. Not ours. January brunch. We bring him a gift. Done. I closed the laptop. I sat at my desk for a long time, looking out the window at the magnolia tree in the backyard. The one Pamela and I planted together. She was 4 years old. She kept patting the dirt around the base of the trunk with her small hands. Very serious about it. I thought about the $320 of food already ordered. The prime rib roast. Carol's china already pulled out of the cabinet. The rum cake recipe card on the counter with Carol's handwriting on it. I thought about the word my daughter had used. Coping mechanism. As if the reason I cooked Christmas dinner every year was a psychological disorder rather than the fact that I loved my children and I loved my wife's memory, and I wanted something of her to survive in this house. I am not a man who cries easily. I cried at Carol's funeral, and I have not cried since 9 years. But I sat at that desk and I cried, and then I stopped, and I thought very carefully about what to do next. I did not reply to the email. I did not call any of them. I went to my kitchen, made a pot of coffee, sat at the table where Carol and I used to have breakfast every morning for 31 years. And I made decisions. The first thing I decided was that I was not going to cancel Christmas. I was going to let the three of them send their excuses on their timeline. In their own words, I was going to let them do exactly what they had planned. And then I was going to do something they never expected. Before you hear what I did next, let me say something to anyone listening who has been in a version of this situation. The worst part was not the anger. The anger I could manage. The worst part was the realization that they had been feeling this way for a long time. And I had not known. I had been calling Pamela every other day about centerpiece flowers, thinking I was being engaged and enthusiastic. And she had been rolling her eyes and saving the voicemails to complain about in email threads I was never supposed to see. That gap between what I thought was happening and what was actually happening, that was the thing that broke something open in me. I spent the next 3 days getting ready for a Christmas that was going to look very different from the one I had planned. I called St. Andrew's Episcopal Church, where I have been a member for 22 years, spoke to our associate pastor, a warm woman named Reverend Clara Moss, who has known me since Carol was alive. I told her I had room at my table for anyone spending Christmas alone, and asked if she knew of people in that situation in our congregation or neighborhood. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Harold, I have a list. Give me a day." I posted in the Charlotte Neighbors Facebook group, "Retired engineer here in Eastover. Made more Christmas food than I can eat alone. If you or someone you know is spending Christmas without family this year, you are welcome at my table. Home-cooked prime rib. Sides. Rum cake. Noon on the 25th. Just come." I also made one more call. I reached out to a contact at WBTV, Charlotte's local news station. Through a retired colleague of mine who does occasional consulting for the city, I said I had a small story for them if they were looking for holiday content. A widower who'd opened his home to strangers after his own family had other plans. The producer called back within 2 hours. Then I waited. The excuses came in over December 18th and 19th. Right on schedule. Daniel texted first. "Dad, I am so sorry. This year has been insane. The firm has me on a big audit that runs through the end of the month, and Lisa's parents have had some health scares, so we're going up to Vermont to check on them. Can we do a brunch in January? I'm so sorry. I know this is your thing." Greg called rather than texted, which surprised me. He did the conference story exactly as planned. Voice steady, sounding rehearsed. I said, "I understand. So, travel safe." Stayed calm. He seemed almost disappointed that I didn't put up resistance. Pamela sent a long text about Kevin's knee. A specialist appointment. Possible minor surgery required. Couldn't have him in a car for 4 hours. She ended with, "You know how much we love you and how much the kids love Grandpa's Christmas. This is just really bad timing." I texted back 3 words. "Don't worry. Pamela." That was all. The morning of December 24th. A producer named Mark and a camera operator named Diane showed up at my house at 9 o'clock. They spent 2 hours filming. The table set with Carol's china, the prime rib and the marinade, the rum cake already made and cooling on the counter. Mark asked me gentle questions on camera. "Why did you open your home to strangers? What does Christmas mean to you without your wife? What do you want people to know about holiday loneliness for older adults?" I told him the truth. I said, "Christmas is not about the people who are obligated to be here. It is about the people who choose to be here. My wife taught me that, and I think this year she is teaching it to me again." Mark wrote that down. By 11:30 on Christmas Day, my house was fuller than it had been in years. Reverend Clara had sent 8 people my way. A man named Walter, 83 years old, a retired postal worker whose wife had passed in March and whose children lived on the West Coast. A young woman named Brianna, 26, a nursing student from Ohio, working Christmas shifts at the hospital, who lived alone in Charlotte and couldn't afford to fly home. An older couple, Frank and Dottie, both in their mid-70s, who had moved to Charlotte from Ohio 2 years ago and hadn't built much of a community yet. A teenager named Marcus, 16, in a foster placement whose foster family had gone out of town for the holiday. A retired school teacher named Helen who had lost her husband and both brothers within the same year. 2 sisters in their 60s, Agnes and Ruth, who had moved here from Puerto Rico to be near their adult children but whose children had made other plans for Christmas. 14 people around my table. 12 strangers. Bruce, plus Diane the camera operator, who I insisted eat with us. We said grace before we ate. I used the same words Carol always used, the ones I had memorized from 31 Christmases with her. Lord, thank you for this table and the people around it. May we remember today that we belong to each other. Amen. Several people cried. Walter cried. I kept it together. Just barely. The food was the best I have ever made. I do not know why. Maybe because I was cooking for people who were genuinely grateful. People who had not expected this day to be good and were surprised that it was. The prime rib was perfect. The roasted vegetables were right. Frank said it was the best Christmas meal he had eaten since his mother was alive. Agnes cried when she tasted the rum cake. She said it reminded her of something her grandmother made. Marcus, the teenager, helped me carry dishes without being asked. After dessert, he and Walter sat together at the end of the table, and Walter told him stories about delivering mail in Cleveland in snowstorms 30 years ago. And Marcus was genuinely listening, leaning forward on his elbows. I watched them and felt something shift in my chest. The news segment aired on the 5 o'clock broadcast. I did not see it in real time because I was still cleaning up with my guests, who had stayed late helping and talking. But my phone started going off around 5:15. Friends from church, an old colleague from the engineering firm, a woman from my neighborhood I knew only to wave at, all texting variations of the same thing. Saw you on the news. Beautiful thing you did. You doing okay? At 5:48. Daniel called. I looked at the name on the screen. Let it go to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. Then a text. Dad. What is happening? Call me, please. Pamela called next. Then Greg. Then all 3 of them in rapid succession. Texts overlapping. Dad, are you okay? Dad, please pick up. We saw the news. Dad. I turned my phone face down on the kitchen counter and finished washing the rum cake pan. The next morning, December 26th. All 3 of my children were on my front porch at 9 in the morning. Daniel had driven 4 hours from Raleigh. Greg had driven 4 hours from Charleston. Pamela had driven 30 minutes from Concord. They stood in a cluster at my door. Daniel in the front, the other 2 slightly behind him, all of them looking like they had not slept. I let them stand there for 1 full minute before I opened the door. Not out of cruelty, out of intention. I wanted to know what they did when they thought I wasn't coming. They knocked twice more. They looked at each other. They stayed. I opened the door. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door closed behind me. The morning air was sharp and cold. Daniel started talking immediately. Dad, we need to explain. We're so sorry. We had no idea you were going to. We didn't think you would be alone. We thought you had friends coming. We never meant. I raised one hand, and he stopped. I know what you did. I said, and I know why, and I need you to listen to me before any explaining happens. I told them about the email. I watched their faces change. Pamela's color drained out. Greg looked at the porch boards. Daniel opened his mouth and closed it again. I told them I had read the whole chain. Every message. The Vermont trip that wasn't about health scares. The conference at Greg's hotel that didn't exist. Kevin's knee that had apparently healed before the Christmas brunch they were already planning for January. I am not a coping mechanism. I said, I am your father. Nobody spoke. I am the man who worked second jobs when money was tight to make sure all three of you graduated without debt. I am the man who drove 6 hours round trip to bring Pamela home when her apartment flooded the first year she lived alone, and then drove back the same day because I had work the next morning. I am the man who sat in a hospital chair for 4 days straight when Greg had his appendix out in 2019 and didn't tell a single person at his job. He was there because he didn't want to make a fuss. Greg looked up at me and his eyes were wet. I am the man who has slept alone in this house for 9 years and never once made any of you feel like that was your problem to solve. I have asked for nothing except one day at Christmas to be with the people I love. That is the full extent of my neediness. One day a year. Dad, Daniel said. His voice was rough. We were wrong. There is no defense. We were wrong. I know you were. I said, and I have something to tell you. I had made an appointment the week before Christmas, December 20th, with an estate attorney named Richard Favre, who I had been referred to through my financial advisor. The appointment had taken 3 hours. When I left Richard's office, my will was fully updated and legally executed. I told my children what it said. My house, currently appraised at $580,000. My retirement savings, $215,000. My life insurance policy, $150,000. My car, my personal property, my investment account. Everything together, just over $960,000. 45% to the Ronald McDonald House of Charlotte, which had been there for our family during a bad medical stretch with Daniel's youngest, a fact Daniel was now visibly remembering. 25% to establish the Carol Bennett Memorial Fund for continuing education, administered through Central Piedmont Community College, supporting adult learners, returning to school after 50, the way Carol had always talked about going back for her master's degree before she got sick. 20% to St. Andrew's Episcopal, 9% to a veterans transitional housing organization I had been volunteering with on Wednesday afternoons for the past year. 1%, divided equally among the three of them, coming to roughly $3,200 each. Pamela sat down on the porch step without meaning to. She just sat down. That's our inheritance, Daniel said quietly. He was not demanding. He sounded like he was reading a diagnosis. That is my money, I said. That Carol and I built together over 40 years of working and saving and going without so that we would have something to leave behind. I am leaving it to people who will use it the way Carol would have wanted it used, and to an organization that had more grace for our family than the three of you showed me this Christmas. Dad, Greg said. He had never looked so young to me as he did standing there on that porch at 39 years old. Looking gutted. You can't... do you mean this permanently? I mean it today. I said, I am not promising anything about tomorrow. What I am telling you is that this is where I am right now. There was a sound behind me. The front door had swung open, and there on the threshold, in pajamas, with candy canes on them, was my granddaughter Lily, Pamela's youngest, 7 years old. Pamela and Kevin must have brought her in the car, assuming we would all end up inside eventually. She had let herself in when no one answered. The way she always did, she looked up at me with Carol's eyes. Grandpa, she said, is it time for the rest of the rum cake? I felt the whole porch hold its breath. I bent down to her level. Not yet. Sweet girl, I said. Grandpa is talking. Can you go watch cartoons for a little while? She looked at her mother sitting on the step, at her uncle's red eyes, at Daniel's rigid posture. Then she put her small hand on my cheek and said, Were you lonely on Christmas? That question, asked by a 7-year-old in candy cane pajamas, undid all three of my children completely. Pamela pressed her hands to her mouth. Greg turned away. I told Lily honestly. But then a lot of wonderful people came over, and we had a very good day. She considered this. Okay, she said, and went back inside to find the remote. I stood up. My back ached. At 71. It always does. I said, if you want to be part of my life going forward, I need you to mean it. Not one Sunday afternoon every few months to check a box. I need to be a person to you. Not an obligation. I need my grandchildren to know me. Not just know what I look like. I need you to call because you want to hear my voice. Not because it has been long enough that guilt kicked in. That is what I need. If you can give that to me, then we have something worth rebuilding. If you cannot, then I would rather spend Christmas with strangers who are genuinely glad to be there. Daniel asked if they could come inside. I thought about it. Then I opened the door. We sat in the kitchen for 2 hours. Nobody performed. Nobody gave a speech. Pamela cried properly. The ugly kind of crying that means something is being released rather than displayed. Greg apologized for the fake conference story in the specific, detailed way that shows a person has been thinking carefully about what they actually did wrong. Daniel, the most guarded of the three, said something that surprised me. He said, I think some of us have been keeping you at a distance since Mom died because it is hard to look at you and not see her absence. And that is our failure. Not yours. And I am sorry. That got me. I am not going to pretend it didn't. I served the leftover rum cake. Lily had 3 pieces. The rest of us had 1 each and sat quietly in a way that felt, for the first time in years, like the quiet of people who are comfortable together rather than the quiet of people managing something. The months that followed were not a straight line. Healing very rarely is. In February, I listed the house with a realtor. I had been thinking about it since before Christmas. Not as punishment, but as clarity. The house had 4 bedrooms and a yard that was increasingly beyond me to maintain. I had been living in it alone for 9 years. It was time. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a senior living community called Kingswood Park in the South Park neighborhood of Charlotte. Active seniors. Good programming. A communal dining room where I had dinner twice a week with people whose names I now knew by heart. My children had strong feelings about the house being sold. Daniel tried to make a practical case for why I should keep it. I listened, thanked him, and signed the listing paperwork the next morning. The house sold in 11 days for $612,000, which went into the estate and the funds I had already set up. What I kept was Carol's recipe box, her 3 favorite paintings, the good china, and the armchair from the living room where she used to read on Sunday mornings. Everything else I gave away or donated. I did not feel sad about it. I felt lighter. The children adjusted. It took time, but they adjusted. Daniel started coming to Charlotte 1 Sunday a month. Just him. Leaving his wife and kids at home. Coming specifically to have lunch with me. We would go to a restaurant. Sit for 2 hours. Talk about things we had never talked about. His marriage, which has some pressure in it he had never admitted to me. His oldest son, who is quiet in a way that worries him. His own fear of aging. Real things. Things sons tell fathers when they have decided to try. Pamela started a habit of dropping by Kingswood Park on weekday afternoons. Sometimes with Lily. Sometimes just herself. She had been carrying guilt about Carol's last years. Feeling like she should have been around more when her mother was sick. And she had transferred some of that avoidance onto me after Carol died, without fully understanding that's what she was doing. She told me this herself, in pieces, over several visits. I appreciated the honesty more than I can say. Greg took longer. He lives the farthest and has the most avoidant personality of the 3. But in April he drove up from Charleston on a Saturday, with no occasion attached. Brought me a bottle of bourbon he knew I liked. And we watched a baseball game together and barely spoke for 3 hours. Which is sometimes exactly the right amount of conversation. I kept volunteering on Wednesday afternoons at the Veterans Housing Organization. I joined a woodworking group at Kingswood Park on Thursday mornings. run by a man named Philip, 74, who had been a furniture maker before he retired and had opinions about joinery that he could talk about for a very long time. I became a better listener. I also met a woman named Evelyn at a lecture series Kingswood ran in the spring. She was 68, a retired pediatric nurse from Greensboro, thoughtful and funny and unflinching about hard topics, which I appreciated. We started going to the lectures together, then to dinner after the lectures. It is nothing I am putting a label on, but it is something, and I am glad for it. Walter, the retired postal worker from Christmas, became a regular visitor. He came to Kingswood Park for the Tuesday bingo game, which he treated with the same competitive focus he probably gave to everything in his life. He beat me 3 times before I started taking it seriously. Marcus, the teenager, asked me in January if I would be his mentor through a program the church was running. I said yes. We met every other week, talked about school, about what kind of man he wanted to be. I told him about Carol. I told him about the choices I made after she died that I was proud of and the ones I was not. He listened, like Walter had listened to him at the Christmas table. Fully. In May, the Carol Bennett Memorial Fund awarded its first grant. A woman named Teresa, 54 years old, a hospital cafeteria worker who had raised 3 kids alone and had always wanted to study accounting. She was starting her degree in the fall at Central Piedmont. Tuition covered by the fund. My children came to the small ceremony the college organized. All 3 of them. Their spouses. 4 of my 5 grandchildren. Evain. Walter. Reverend Clara. We sat together in a conference room while Teresa spoke about what the opportunity meant to her. She talked about her mother's belief that it was never too late to become who you were supposed to be. She said Carol's name with such care, like she understood what it meant to honor someone you had never met. On the way out, Pamela took my arm. She said, "Mom would have loved this. She would have." I agreed. Greg walked on my other side. He said, "I want to talk about Christmas this year. I want it to be at my place. I know it's a drive for everyone, but I want to do it properly. I want to cook." I looked at him. "You know how to cook," he paused. "No, but I'm going to learn." We had dinner at a waterfront restaurant that evening. 17 of us at a long table, running well past 9 o'clock. Lily fell asleep against my arm during dessert, and I sat very still so she wouldn't wake up. Daniel, across the table, caught my eye and smiled. Not the performative smile, the real one. I thought of what I had said to Mark from the news crew back in December, before my guests arrived, when he had asked me what I wanted people to take away from my story. I had said, "I want them to know that you can love your children completely and still require them to do better. That those 2 things are not in conflict. That love without standards is not love. It is just need." And my wife, who loved without limit but also without compromise, taught me that. I believe it more now than I did then. I am writing this from the balcony of my apartment at Kingswood Park on a Tuesday morning in early October. The leaves in the courtyard below are just starting to turn. My coffee is getting cold. Philip from woodworking is going to be late to our session again, and I am going to give him a hard time about it. And he is going to pretend to be offended. And then we will spend an hour building a small cabinet for Evelyn's hallway, which I promised her 3 weeks ago. My phone shows a text from Marcus. Coach says I have a real shot at starting point guard. Tell no one until it's official. I am telling no one. I am also very proud of him. There is a voicemail from Greg that I will listen to on my walk this afternoon. He has been calling on a semi-regular basis, sometimes with news, sometimes just because he was driving and thought of something he wanted to tell me. Those are my favorite ones. I want to say something to you directly, because some of you listening are going to recognize yourselves in this story, not as me, but as my children, if you have a parent you have been managing rather than loving. If you have been calculating the minimum required visits rather than showing up because you genuinely want to. If you have ever used the word burden to describe someone who gave you every good thing they had, please hear this. They know. They may not tell you they know. They may be quiet on the phone for 30 seconds and then say no. No. I understand in a certain voice, but they know, and they are carrying it. Alone. In a house where the other chair is empty, and the china only comes out once a year, you still have time to do better. Not because of any inheritance. Not because of guilt, because they are your people. And this time that you have with them is running out faster than you can see from where you are standing. My wife Carol used to say that love is the only thing that gets bigger the more you spend it. She was right about that, as she was right about most things. I have spent more of it this past year than any year since she died. On strangers and old friends and my complicated children and a teenager who needed a Tuesday to talk. And I am, at 71 years old, wealthier than I have been in a long time. Not in the way my children once expected, but in every way that matters. If you're hearing this and something in it landed, I would love to know about it in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you have a story of your own. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, please pass it on. This is Harold Bennett, reminding you that it is never too late to stand up, and it is never too late to show up. Until next time.